everyone. We're going to get started with the afternoon. Hope everyone had an enjoyable lunch, got some coffee. We're ready to start. I'd like to introduce Sarrah Vesselov, who is like, I think my kindred spirit, maybe. Fun fact, she's 21 days older than me. And she likes cats as well, and eggplant.
Aubergine.
So, aubergine, as some people might call it. But yeah, Sarah's really rad. She wrote this really awesome book called Building Design Systems, which is really, really amazing if you haven't read it. It is very good from a strategic standpoint if anyone's thinking about how to think about design systems, not just like the colors and components and I don't know, line weights and stuff. So, but I think everyone has probably lived through some design system trauma. Things don't go the right way. Nothing's ever perfect. But that's okay. And then Sarah's going to talk about just building design systems through impossible situations, which you might be able to relate to. You might be able to get some great learnings from her experience. So I'll let Sarah take it away.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. I think I already had a hot mic moment. Apologies. If you heard it, sorry. If you didn't, you're lucky. I hope everyone had a great lunch. I can't see any of you because I am absolutely blinded. Luke, I see you. You're nice and bright. Thank you very much. My name is Sarrah Vesselov. A while back, I wrote a book on design systems, but right now I am the director of design at Honeycomb. And I want to tell you a little bit about our challenges and some things that we went through in building our design system, which is called Lattice. And so we call this talk Leading Design Systems in Impossible Circumstances. But I'm pretty sure that for most of you, these circumstances are going to be painfully familiar, especially given some of the talks that we've already heard. So I'm hoping that you can relate to some of our trials, tribulations, and maybe take something away from that. First, let me just explain what Honeycomb is. Not selling it to you, so don't worry, you don't need to buy it, but it does help to understand what we do. It's an observability platform. It helps engineers understand, debug, and improve production systems. So it's designed for high cardinality data, and it's really about collaborative problem solving. So it empowers every engineer to instrument and query the behavior of their system. Now, I think it's also helpful to really understand what the makeup of our team looks like. Every team is different. I have been the director for 4 years, building the design team, the practice, and the culture at Honeycomb. I'd say that overall, at this point, we're a good size and shape for our company. We're keeping pace with other departments, particularly engineering and product. And as you can see, we have a dedicated group of product designers, a visual design team, a UX researcher, lonely and sad. We hope to get him some friends soon, and our principal designer. But we're in that really uncomfortable space, right? Where you're big enough and you're working on something where you need a design system, but you're not big enough for a design systems team. You can't, no matter how you try to spin it, you're not going to be able to get that going the way that you want. I've tried a few different ways, but unfortunately, we're just not large enough. We can't support a design systems team. We have one designer per team right now working in a triad system, which I'll go over here in a minute. So we just weren't big enough, so we had to make it work with what we had. And now last year I gave a talk at Hatch Conf in Berlin, and this was all about the challenges that we faced in getting our design system up and running. We got some real early buy-in success and momentum. We had help from the VP of engineering, the VP of product was on board, and we were all good to go. We got some dedicated effort, and then we stalled. We ran into what I like to call the little monsters of design systems building. Design systems work and effort got deprioritized for feature work. If it wasn't on the roadmap, it wasn't going to get done. And when I say no collaboration here, I don't mean that people didn't want to collaborate. I think we have a great team. But it's really hard to collaborate and work on something that maintains and grows your system overall for the future when you're worried about going up to a deadline, when you have that roadmap that you have to deliver to, right? You're always going to end up putting off those things that aren't going to show progress tomorrow, right? A design system is often going to show progress in the future. And at that time, it was all about progress tomorrow, maybe even today if we can do it. And then there was this kind of false optimism, which was the weirdest thing I'd ever encountered. No matter how many times I had said, hey, we can't work on our design system this way. We can't do it piece by piece. It has to be an effort that we think about, that we architecture, that is actually organized. It's not just something that's going to organically grow and happen as we find a piece that needs to be put into the system. What I did find was that wasn't heard as much as when I did message, hey, but we were able to get this one text component done. What people heard, what management, was, we got this one text component done. We added the lattice. Yeah, right? So they thought things were happening, that more was being done than really was being done. And so by the end of 2022, I really thought that my design system was dead. It was really, really close, but it wasn't dead. Through talking openly about the challenges and emphasizing the need for a dedicated effort, even in the we had 1 quarter to get as much done as possible. And after that, Lattice would need to be able to sustain momentum without the guarantee of dedicated time and resources. And I think this is really important to the story. This is, for my team, felt very similar to what had happened before. We'd gotten buy-in, we'd gotten this dedicated time, but at that time, we didn't have any front-end engineers. We had all full stack. And I'm sure you can imagine how hard it is to work on a design system we had front-end expertise, we did have a dedicated team, and so I felt a little bit better about that, but it was something to think about. The other was, there was no design systems team, right? Once our time was up, there was nobody else that was going to pick this up. So that meant we had to be really careful and think about the goals and outcomes to keep Lattice going in the long term, to avoid those issues. So what were the important outcomes that we need to produce in order to avoid the same failure pattern from before? So I think it's also important to understand our structure because that presented its own challenge. The way we distribute work at Honeycomb we own it without continuous collaboration and input from the rest of the organization. So this would be something we really have to balance to avoid a real tug of war of one team either pushing their ideas onto the rest of the company or trying to pull everybody along. And this one really blew my mind. I was really surprised by this. As a design leader, who are the stakeholders? Who are the users? You're the users, but so are other people. And it was momentary, and they got over it really quickly. But it was this kind of funny moment where they're like, oh, wait a minute, what is this? How do we work on this? And last but not least, there were engineering challenges. We had both legacy code and Lattice components built in React. So for every component, we needed to ask, should we update this? Or should we create something new? Both are hard. What we have has issues, but something new will require neurosurgery sometimes to get it to work with everything else that you already have, to replace all that old code. And this is a system that we didn't necessarily know where everything was. So it involved a lot of auditing and spelunking and going in to see where did these things live and how easy was it going to be to move things out. So it wasn't as easy as going in, making a new component, making this beautiful new thing in Storybook, and then deploying it out. It wasn't going to be that simple. So had to come up with a plan. We had 1 quarter to make things happen. And so I wanted to make sure that we were clear on the goals for getting there. And so this effort was actually not headed up by me. I was the project engineer Metallic Desai and senior product manager May Lua worked on this. They were the triad involved. And early on, they were absolutely adamant that the #1 outcome was that everyone have a clear path to using and contributing to our design system. That was the goal. Not to have a fully fledged design system, not to have an entire library that people could use, but that everyone had an idea of how they could contribute to it and how they could use it. Because at this point in time, that was really not clear. So we started out by doing some research. As you saw in an earlier talk, I took some pictures of those slides. They were excellent. For ours, we did user interviews and we did some surveys, asking historically, what has made it difficult for you to create and update components, really trying to find those pain points. Figma, or Visual Style Guide in Figma, started as an audit of our existing styles and patterns. And I think a lot of people will do this, right? It's not often that you will start designing with a system. You have designs already, you have patterns already, and you're going to document those, and then decide how you want to improve and evolve those over time. So we went ahead and documented everything that we had, whether we thought it was perfect or we thought it was horrible, it was documented and it lived in Figma. And this allowed us to make designs and to work with PM and engineering on all of our efforts. We also had some stories in Storybook that matched what we had in Figma. We had started our work on the components that matched. So you can see some of them make it over from Figma, right? They make it over and they're in our story, so that means they're part of Lattice, they're part of our design system. And then we get to zeroheight, our documentation, and we pull those things in, and you can see that we have this mixed bag, right? So we have we're showing people designs that have not been implemented into components, so they're not available for engineers to use, which is very confusing. They're looking at these beautiful designs inside of our documentation saying, why can't I use this? Well, it's not actually a component yet. It's something that we want to make a component. And then in other cases, they're using components that don't even match the styles that we have set forth for later. So it was in a really confusing place. And it was something that was making it really hard for people to contribute to and see the value. So to help clear up this confusion, Tisha came up with a plan to first find the inconsistencies and bridge the gaps in this design process, to encourage more collaboration between designers and engineers. And the ultimate goal here was to have a close-to-code Figma library of I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. So if you dig in to what this looked like, the first component I'll talk about is very, very simple, our avatar component. So the avatar already existed. It was in Figma, it was in Storybook, and it was in zeroheight. And so what we did was we went ahead and we did an audit looking in production and making sure, one, are we actually using the story, the component that we've built? And yes, we were. And are we using all of the different variants that we've defined? And no, we absolutely weren't. We had way more avatars defined than we needed, lots of different sizes. It wasn't defined where they needed to be used. And so we were able to go through and pare down and simplify what we had in Figma, and then again, what we had in Storybook. So this was a lot of collaboration between engineering and design to make sure that they understood where things were, what was matching, what was different. Naming conventions were checked. And so over here, you can see that in Storybook, our naming conventions that our engineers use is exactly the same as the naming conventions our designers are using. So that way, when they're having conversations, when they're talking about what should be used to implement a pattern or to build something, a new page or interface, you're speaking the same language. There's no room for there to be any misunderstanding. So this one was a lot more complex, and this is an example of using the same process for different things. Avatar was pretty easy. We audited, we did some deletions, we did some updates, and then boom, it was ready to go. Nothing really had to be changed. Our code block component was very, very different. So the code block component had been updated in some places. So it had a story. It had been implemented in some areas of production, so it was being used in the UI in some places, and in other places it wasn't. So this made we had this really confusing situation for engineers where some people were using the component and some people were kind of using their own little bespoke thing that had been made. So design and engineering button for making sure that you've copied it. This was all stuff that did not exist in the component that was in production. These were all tickets that we had had sitting in our UX inbox for quite a while, right? These are like quality of life improvements for our engineers, for people using our system. And so while we were evaluating this component and evaluating the design, we made these updates. So we double-checked our naming guidelines, captured any additional information, such as where it's used, accessibility concerns, new additional usage, and added that into zeroheight. And so for this component, the designs were updated, the code block was updated, and then in production, anywhere that was being used the other original or bespoke system, that was replaced. So that was all part of this process, was going through this one. So this one took a lot longer. It actually involved rewriting the code. It involved a lot of hunt and peck for this code. It was a lot more painful, I think, than the avatar process. But it was the same exact process. There wasn't anything different between what we did for that and what we did for this. My clicker stopped working. Okay. On the other side of this is how the whole team was able to work together on going through each of these. It was a huge undertaking, and 1 quarter, 3 months is not a long time. So working through the process allowed Tisha and team to really tighten up the design system and institute a standard of checkpoints for engine design. And this is an example of what our Asana is set up to be. So whether you use Jira, use Asana, or whatever it is, this is how they set up the boards to make it easy to organize and track. And this was a big part of the process, and this had a lot of influence, I think, and impact on the final process that was laid out for the team. On the far left, you can see there's an area for suggestions, right? We want people to feel like they can suggest something new. Then we have an area for components. So any component that's being worked on has its own ticket, has its own dialogue. There's a separate one for tokens. Design is a checklist. So we have a checklist for what design should be looking for and making sure is part of any design before it goes into our system. When something's ready for development, in development, implemented, there's all of those categories. So it's very regimented Consumed and deprecating. Consumed means it's been audited, designed, and developed and tested. And it's 100% integrated into the component library based on our usage guidelines. So this kept everyone on track and helped them really keep focused on what was in and what was out. And then deprecating components that the team is ready to remove. And we actually did deprecate a few things. There were some things that we found that just no longer needed to be in our system. We weren't even using anymore. And then within zeroheight and Figma, we use tagging and folders to help both design and engineering understand the current state of any given component, right? So we have all this context switching that we do. It's just part of our job, but it can be overwhelming. So within Figma here, you can see on the left-hand side, this is our folder for our in-progress components. And it has a cover page that explains to you exactly what an in-progress component is, and then links to the Lattice design system process, our component lifecycle, and component status. So we want to make sure that no matter where you are, if you feel disoriented, you can reorient yourself and understand where this is in the process. So for this work, design and engineering were working together, but in separate areas of the design system. And I wanted to put this slide together because I think we talk a lot about design and engineering, but PM had a lot to do with this as well. They were along for the ride in prioritization, in messaging. They were a really great partner in helping to message up in terms of what was working, what wasn't, what the team needed, and how things were going. They also were really great in messaging across to other teams in the company. Design focused obviously on our existing design system documentation in zeroheight, our components in Figma, and a true up of designs. Engineering was really focused on reviewing, updating, and migrating code, but that PM was a vital role. So I think this just illustrates that design systems involve everyone, and that when you're building them, when you're talking about them, you should include everyone. And going through this process together as a team really allowed us to work out this framework. And that was our end goal, really. The components that we built, the designs that we updated, that wasn't our end goal. Our end goal was this. This was what we cared about, was coming up with how do you contribute to this system? What are the guardrails that we want to put in place to make it easier to contribute, right? So we have contributing for fixes, small enhancements, new components or patterns. There's a whole process. It links to our Lattice components, and this again is within our zeroheight. So if you want information, you can go here and you'll get all the links that you need. We also provide a feedback area because one of the things that we heard is like, how do I give feedback? Like, how can I talk to you about the system? How can I tell you what I think? Well, we have a whole channel in our Slack called Project Lattice, which I've been posting and driving everyone nuts today with all the amazing slides that have been presented. That's where you can go and give feedback and talk directly to us. And we want that to be a part of this system. So this, it's so funny, like when you do something and then you look back and you're like, I can't, oh, I'm so embarrassed, don't look at it. So like, this was our Rev 1 of our Lattice site that we did. And, you know, it had lain dormant for some time. And so Tisha really took on the process of completely revamping the information architecture and making sure that all the information in our site was up to date and there was a good indication of what components were in use, what components weren't in use, and where to go if you weren't sure. And so this was where we ended up by the end of this process. And I was just like blown away when I saw this. I was just so proud of my team. I'm like such a design mom. I was like, oh my God, look at it, it's so beautiful. And I still feel that way anytime I see it. So we did actually remove a lot of documentation. We removed documentation for components and patterns that were incomplete or needed more evaluation. And this goes against what I had originally felt in the beginning. I felt like more information might be better. Even if it wasn't complete, let's put it in there. And I think I was wrong. I think it confused people, and I think it was overwhelming, and I think that until it is complete, it was better to keep it out of there. And keep people asking those questions, because it's kind of a reminder of like, it's not complete, it's kind of annoying, let's go back and do that. And it's been a good catalyst for us to continue to work on those things that we continue to get questions about. So what the heck did I do? This is my chair, by the way. I don't really have a chair like that. For my part as director and product owner of Lattice, it was really my job to empower my designers and teams to build on the foundations that I'd set and not feel bound or constrained by them. I didn't want them to feel like it was the looming shadow of Sarah, ooh, it's my design system, don't fuck it up. Like, I wanted them to feel like they could just blow it up and do what they wanted. So, you know, and that's hard, because I care a lot. And I had stakeholders, right? I have my VP that I have to answer to, and I have my CTO and my CEO asking me questions. And so I put a lot of trust in my team to do what was right for the product and for the designers. So I did that through regular one-on-ones with the PM, the designer, and the engineers. The biggest thing for me was fostering and maintaining psychological safety. I wanted to make sure that people felt comfortable saying no, pushing back, and coming up to me with any issues that they saw. And then a big part for me was messaging upwards, any potential obstacles or failure modes that I saw coming, so that I could help head those off before they happened. So, outcomes and takeaways. I just think this guy is so cute, this little monster guy. All right. We completed version 1 and went back and talked to everybody again. And they loved the new direction. It was nice to get some validating feedback. The new processes to validate changes and documentation, usage guidelines, everything they felt made it more intuitive for design and engineering to contribute. So that was a really, the first big thing that we saw that said, yeah, we're going in the right direction here. Some big takeaways for me and for, I think, everyone here is that design systems are not a one-time solution. Maintaining them is intensive work requiring dedicated investment. They should constantly evolve based on user feedback. So with this initial strategy, the expectation is that team members are going to surface ideas and take action collaboratively. It is still owned by one team, but now there's a contribution process. And that one team doesn't own it in terms of guidelines and talking down to everybody else about what you should do with the system. That team, they're stewards. Their job is to help be the ambassadors for our system across the company. Everything is an experiment. And this is one of our core values at Honeycomb, and I love it. Don't get attached to specific outcomes, because those can really prevent you from moving forward. I did not get attached to my original zeroheight documentation site, as amazing as it was. I let it go. And look at the outcome. It's so much better than it would have been. And so we really didn't get attached to busting out 25 components or having this much documentation. We really focused on our goals. And then we constructed with purpose. We really had a purpose in what we were building, and we tried to evaluate every decision and every piece of it with honesty. Like, is this really helpful? Is this really going to move us forward? And if not, that's okay. Let's throw it away and try something else. And then we shared and we just iterated on it and iterated on it. Failure is a constant. You're going to fail all the time. I was afraid I was going to come up here and fail at this talk, just because, you know, that's what you do when you speak, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to suck. But it's what we learn, right, that matters. I learned today that I'm all right. I didn't do too bad, right? So, thank you. So, don't get so wrapped up in your outcomes. Don't worry about the failures. You're going to learn from that. In fact, embrace them. And I'm not doing this whole like fail fast, blah, 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 like any of that. You know, it doesn't feel good to fail. It really doesn't. But it's always going to happen. And so just learn what you can from it and keep moving. And then thank you for listening. I really appreciate you coming and listening. I want to thank my design team who did all this work. I did not do this, they did this. And I'll be around all day, and I love chatting about design systems, so come say hello.